Welcome, everyone, to this exciting episode of Data as the Fourth Pillar, the Board and CXO Briefing with Sid and Sujay. Today, we are privileged to have with us Rajeev Sawhney. He has operated both as a CEO with full P&L risk accountability, and now he governs from the board level, where the questions are not about just systems, it's about strategy, risk, resilience, and long term value. Rajiv has over 40 years in the technology industry, including president of HCL Technologies in Europe, and then non-executive director and chairman of Oxide Limited, an Oxford University company. And now, as a board director at TBC Bank Group, which is a leading financial services group in Georgia and a fast expanding digital financial ecosystem in Uzbekistan. And it's also a FTSE 250 company. At TBC, he currently chairs the Technology, Data, AI, and Cybersecurity Committee, sits on the Risk Committee and the REMCO Committee. Rajiv has lived through many eras that we have seen: the mainframe era, the internet revolution, the cloud transformation, and now what we call as the AI led intelligence era. So, welcome, Rajiv, to this show. It's really a privilege to have you here as a guest.
Thanks, Sujay, and thanks, Sid. It looks like the podcast was about Rajiv Sahni and less to do with data. That's the way you took up a lot of time in the introduction. But thank you very much for that glowing introduction, and it's such a privilege to be with you and talk about a subject which is so dear to me, and I think the world is quite passionate about what's happening in this whole world of data and AI. So I'm more than happy to have my chance to share with you my learnings and thoughts on the subject. Thank you.
Your introduction deserves that attention because you have this unique experience, and that fits nicely with our target audience for this podcast. Is not only having that CEO accountability and responsibility, but at a board level at an organization, which I find really unique, Rajiv, which has given that attention to have a committee of data and technology at a board level. We haven't found many organizations, and that too with a leading FTSE 250 company. So tell us more, Rajiv, some background about that.
Interesting, but I want to make this amply clear that I'm speaking today in my personal capacity and with my background in the field of technology and business over the last 40 years. There will be passing references to TBC Bank Group, where I am currently sitting as a supervisory board director as well as chair of the technology and data, artificial intelligence, and cyber security committee. As you rightly pointed out, that there are very few organizations, particularly in the FTSE 250, which you will find have a focused committee on this subject. And since you're asking for the background as to why this is so, just let me roll back a little bit and say that that there are some regulatory requirements based on PRA, which you would be aware of, that the regulator has some specific committees which are there in the area of audit, risk, and REMCO. But beyond that, they do not specify anything. And if you look at even the UK governance code, they will talk about the details of what committees can be there. However, I would think that it is about time that regulators and the governance code also begin to take notice of this a little more closely. And there are systemic risks that are associated with organizations, existential risks that I would say. I think the short answer is that there was foresight on the part of our board to think of creating such a committee. A little more on that, if I was to mention, this has been a very fast growing bank and with a very talented management team. And there's a lot of good work that's been done, including the creation of a subsidiary. There's a whole subsidiary that has been created in Uzbekistan, which is a digital bank, and it's a fintech. So technology plays a very important role in the expansion and international growth of the bank, and therefore it was necessary to have that focus. And the board thought it was vital to create such a committee. So there you are, and thankfully, with my background in both financial services as well as in technology. Sitting at the intersection of these two has given me that privilege of being there to chair this committee.
Amazing. I mean, really excellent insights, Rajiv. I wanted to delve onto this part a little bit further beyond just the bank example that you gave, but also tap in a little bit onto your experience of 4+ decades. I mean,
Mhm.
what we see with a lot of boards is, still many people at the board level consider data as a cost center. They don't see it as important as we've said, like the technology, as you rightly alluded to, or even in some cases people or processes given part of the operating model. So what would be your thoughts for such board members, right? Because the question I get a lot from my discussions in my day-to-day job also is, it's very difficult to value data, whereas it's much easier to value or have KPIs around processes, for example, how much efficiency and cost saving or value is being driven, right? So how do you answer this from a macro level for boards, not just in the regulated industry, but other industries as such? How do you explain to them the importance of data?
There are people who will be early adopters, and there'll be people who will be laggards in this entire process. And you will find that there are companies that are usefully utilizing data as a tremendous opportunity for growth. And there are others who do not value it at this point in time. So, when you see in a competitive world, when rivals will see that one is ahead of the other, and they start looking at, can I get some clues in this whole process as to what is it that these guys are doing different? They will find out that there's a good use of data that is being utilized by their competitors. You had mentioned about companies like JP Morgan.
Yeah, JP Morgan has the chief data and analytics officer reporting to CEO Jamie Dimon.
Where can you find a better example? A company that moves trillions of dollars every day
Yeah.
is having a chief data officer reporting straight into the topmost person in the organization. It's evident that there must be a reason for something like that, that they value the data so much.
Yeah.
I know Sujay likes to call this the data is fire, and it can even power the engines for growth, or it can destroy factories. It is enormous amount of power that you can get out of data. So I think it's about time that organizations, small and big, start using the power of data.
Yeah. And Rajiv, you hinted on an important point we see across ourselves. Now we are living in a heightened VUCA world that you yourself call about high volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that exist.
Yeah.
Are boards becoming ultra defensive because of it, or that opportunity angle continues to gain that importance? And how is then data leverage towards this opportunity part as well?
So, actually, there are two or three things that are happening concurrently, if I may call it. So that's what is making up this whole thing of the highly volatile, ambiguous, and complex an uncertain world. When you've got, on one hand, you've got all the geopolitics and the energy security and the AI polarization that is beginning to happen. We are experiencing some of the greatest upheavals of our times. We happen to be sitting right in the midst of it all, witnessing some of the biggest changes that have ever happened in life. So on one hand, you've got something like this. Then you've got something at the other end where there is data, and the explosion of data that has happened is like crazy in these last few years. It's growing at about 30-35% every year.
Right.
And you got some, I don't know, some crazy number that I was reading, 175 zettabytes of data that exist as of today, which is, if you were to put it in lay terms, it's like every person on the planet, whether it's a child or anybody, 8 billion people, if each one of them were to have about 200 iPhones of storage, that's the enormity of data that exists, and that's multiplying at or growing at the rate of 30% every year. So this explosion of data that's happening, and it's earlier it was just the structured data, but now you've got unstructured data, which is constituting almost 70-80% of the, or maybe 85% of the total data that's available. And that's like photographs, PDF documents, scanned documents, and all those kind of things. When you've got so much of data, that's again adding further complexity to the whole situation. And as though that was not enough, in the last couple of years, you've seen what AI has done, to the world. I mean, you've got deep fakes that are coming out. You've got individuals getting blackmailed. There is all kinds of risks that are, there are cyber security issues that are coming up. There is disinformation being spread, all kinds of things that are beginning to happen. So when in this kind of a world, with the uncertainty that's beginning to happen, unless you've got very specific domain knowledge and capability to identify specific problems that you want to solve, and then you you boil this whole ocean of data in that entire process, and then you're looking for a solution to get a valuable solution and to get something which is meaningful. Only then you would be able to make use of this data in this kind of a world. And with this enormous amount of data, you can use AI algos and solve those problems, provided your data is in a good place.
Very good points, Rajiv. I'm just reflecting on what you said because at one hand, you're very right. The amount of data is increasing exponentially. Just on the VUCA part, since I was indeed part of this recent turmoil, I want to give a couple of examples to get your perspectives as well. One from a positive standpoint, and another one from let's say an improvement standpoint. So from a positive standpoint, I think as Rajiv, you and Sujay know, I was stuck in transit for a week or so, and I think what the airlines did was a very good experience. They had, of course, not foreseen this situation as many of us did not. So I think the whole setup they had done from a data standpoint was more from a customer experience, having my family information, having me as part of their rewards program, help them understand my preferences. Even though I was booked on a different ticket than my family, they identified we are all part of like a same household and treated us that way, right? So that's kind of like a positive experience where they had data, maybe they had used it for a different use case, but they were able to easily pivot it in a VUCA situation and still give me a very positive experience, but in a very different kind of a situation. So that's kind of one example. The other example I want to give is, don't want to call the enterprise out, but during the tariff situation which has happened for the last few months, I know of an enterprise who did not have enough data of their suppliers, and they were stuck in the tariff situation by being stuck with one or two suppliers who had to increase the price, which resulted in the product itself to also increase in the price. Now imagine if they had a lot of data for this unforeseen situation of maybe suppliers from a different region altogether, or maybe local suppliers, they might have been able to make a much quicker decision of what could be an alternate supplier I could get this part from, right? So that is kind of another example I just wanted to throw out and get your perspective.
So, Sid, good question and good context setting that you've also given about your recent experience when you got stuck in the Middle East and your flights and everything were affected, and the airline was able to make use of that data in a very valuable way to give you the greatest customer experience, treating your family as one unit and so on and so forth. And that actually nicely brings me to the point that I was trying to make earlier, which was about having the data in a good place. And it also plays to your other example of the tariff where the customer had problems and challenges that were there. In my experience, and I've been talking to various business leaders and other industry folks and fellow directors with whom I've exchanged notes, that everybody has been very excited about this whole AI thing, and they're fascinated with the power of AI and what it can do. And Chat GPT only added a lot more spice to this whole scenario in the last couple of years, as you can see. But what people often forget is about their data. And I just want to ask you: have you ever relocated your house after living in a particular place for some time? When you relocate after 10 years or 15 years, I mean, you're still a young fellow. But I can tell you, if I moved out of 30 years, and Sujay knows that I'm now currently living somewhere else, but after 30 years, when you move out of a place, there is so much baggage that is there around. It's incredible. Because you can't find, where are these things? They are there somewhere, but you don't know where they are. And that's the kind of a mess that you will find, even with all the organizational skills that you may have. Over a period of time, organizations tend to accumulate a lot of data, and it is spread all over the place. And to find the right data and to be able to use it in a meaningful manner and to create value out of that is one of the most challenging experiences that they can ever have. And therefore, what do? They embark on this whole data program. They pick up a leader who's going to kind of lead the data program. That leader will in turn report into the CEO of the organization, who in turn will report this matter up or into the board or into the committee. I mean, that's the kind of focus that you need to bring in, because these projects can take anything from 1 to 3 years in just bringing into shape the data that you've got. And it's like, mid-air refueling. So even as you are cleaning up the past data, you've got new data that's coming in loads, because it's 30% growth that you're talking about on an average at a macro level. But individual organizations can have much, much more data that can be generated on a day-to-day basis. So with that kind of enormity of data that is coming in, I just think that your first and foremost task is to clean it all up and have a system, have a process to be able to have data in an organized manner, and then served through what your language is called the semantic layer. And then there is some meaningful method. Otherwise, if they had all that data with them in the airline, for example, in your case, but they couldn't make out what to do or where to look for it in a crisis situation while you are still at the airport, what would you do? It would be worthless, right? You cannot underestimate the importance of organizing your data in a good manner, and then having a system to continuously keep cleansing it up so that you don't have to go through this exercise of doing it every now and then. So it's got to be once and for all a system of cleaning this data, and then it's a dynamic situation. So you've got to be completely always on top of it. Basically, you basically have to be on top of it in real time.
I think this real time and then this mid-air refueling, Rajiv, is very critical. Like you said, it's not only about the historical data. Now with the high VUCA world, there's a lot of unstructured data, a lot of data that is coming in. You have to act fast, and like you said, act in the real time. That's very critical. And one of the example we all know of being in Europe, the ECB. The ECB actually in 2021 moved away from historical data to live
Mhm.
data management. So
Correct.
what it has done, ECB has created a data committee which is led by the director of general statistics, and the data office sits underneath, and that's been one of the key objective. It's not just about historical data management. How do you move at live data management? And that's a very critical and differentiating capability which, at least in my experience, many organizations are struggling with.
Mhm.
How do you see the appreciation at board level? I feel, Rajiv, you are in a very lucky position of working at an organization wherein that board level attention exists, but 90% or 95% organizations do not have that. So what would be your advice to board members who are in such organizations wherein data is still seen as a byproduct, who are not like the JP Morgans of the world, being lucky that the CDO is reporting to Jamie Dimon and you have that authority and accountability flowing down?
So, first of all, I'm not at an organization that was born with this capability. So,
Yeah.
it has also had to change. A lot of it has to do with the leadership, of course. There's no two ways about it. The more progressive leaders will look at the future, the less progressive ones will look at the past and historical data and hope that the future will be something that they can predict based on historical data. But the world is changing so rapidly that you have to have a foresight, and you got to look at this kind of situation that is emerging. I call it a new world disorder, actually. So this is how this whole situation is emerging right now. Now, how do people get onto this bandwagon of accepting data at the high organizational level? I think the younger generation, in a way, which is now taking over these CEO leadership roles that are there, are much more digital natives. They understand the value of data in any case. But if you look at it, some of the larger corporations that have been around and who've got very senior leaders who are not very well exposed to digital technologies, I think then in a lot many ways, the regulators' role, I had mentioned right at the beginning of our discussion, they have an important role to kind of bring this into focus. The second, of course, is that a lot of these CEOs of again progressive companies go through these management institutions like IMD and many other, Stanford and Harvard and all that. They get all of them get exposed to the importance of data that is coming in, and then books like yours, for example, are a good medium to kind of communicate the importance of data. But in a nutshell, I would say that it's the difference between the laggards and the progressive companies that are there. They recognize, and most people who are at the helm of affairs are smart enough and sharp enough, and they read about it. I was really surprised at seeing this. My friend's father, he's like he must be about almost 80 years of age, and I asked him something. He says, "Oh, you can ask Chat GPT now." I said, "My God, this old man, he's talking of Chat GPT." But they're all having now. They've all downloaded. I've seen many other senior colleagues in the industry have all got AI apps that are there, with them, and they recognize the importance of data, and they know when it is hallucinating or when there are biases that are there. So they're beginning to see those things quite easily. I mean, what kind of motivation can you offer your people who have not yet got onto the bandwagon? I think it's an evolutionary process. It normally would not have been revolutionary, but in this case, there is a very high possibility because of the speed at which things are changing that it may take a much shorter duration of time for companies to accept this and for regulators to insist on it.
No, very well said, Rajiv. And I'm kind of reflecting on what you said and also thinking out loud also on top of it. One of the very important points that you've said, which we've also tried to highlight when we say data as the fourth pillar, is the pillar needs to work with the other pillars. And often we have seen in our day to day experience, data is still seen as being this thing that a particular data team does. So, for example, you have data engineers, you have data scientists, you have even data analysts who are building reports and dashboards and you know putting these nice visualizations in front of the executives. But what is in your opinion, the way we can also ensure the non-data folks, so as to say it, like the business, like the executives, also are really contributing? So again, going back to the specific example I gave before with the airlines, if the person on the airport, the airways staff, didn't recognize when I told him that these are two different airline tickets I have, and then fed that back into the whole data chain, still that would have been seen as operationally two different tickets. That feedback loop towards that main data system, which has this household information, which was important, right? If you just left it to the data science or the data engineering team, that empathy would not have transferred, because the person who's there in the airport saw the situation that we were in, again going back to the VUCA thing. So how do you see that this applied at the enterprise scale, right? Because that's the biggest thing everyone is trying to crack. How do I ensure that everyone is contributing in some shape or form to this whole data ecosystem?
There are two things that I wanted to talk about, Sid. One is customer experiences, to highlight the experience that you've been through. Uh, and we'll come to the other part of it in terms of the rest of the organization following up. So let's take the customer experience. This thing is all about the three E's that I talk about as the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the emotion that is involved. So if they do not have that empathy, and that's the problem that we face in this current world with data particularly, is people become emotionless and use just dry data by itself, which by itself has little or no meaning absolutely. And therefore, behavioral science is a very essential element that needs to be paired along with data science, because by itself, neither of them can serve any purpose. But together, they can pair up and they can become a very potent force in enhancing customer experience, for example, or achieving any business objectives or creating any real value that may be existing. And then to your second point about how does the rest of the organization kind of come together, and they're having lots of data scientists within the organization. I think it's akin to what, if we take a look at an organization that has an typical HR function. What is the role of an HR function? Are they the people who kind of help you with all your requirements in an organization? It's really the real HR managers in an organization are your line managers. They are the ones who kind of make things happen. HR is only a facilitating role that kind of creates the platform for the line managers to be able to look after their employees, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And make it a frictionless experience for them, and a productive experience for the organization. And very much in the same way, the data scientists have that sort of a role to play in terms of facilitating the use of data. There is a lot of knowledge that is built into the organization, but that knowledge is useless without the intelligence. And that intelligence has to come when the knowledge can be deployed in a real life situation.
Yeah.
So, if I am doing credit appraisals in a real life example, I may be doing it through the traditional method of looking at each application and then going through the various steps that are required to be doing it. And it'll take me a certain amount of time and certain amount of effort to do that. And then I'll be deploying many other resources to it. However, data sciences group can put together, the relevant data that's made available to them, and create what is called self-service. So it is pushed down to the front end teams that can utilize that data. The data scientist doesn't need to do anything. They are just facilitating the use of that data to the frontline teams that are then empowered to do what their business objectives or what their KPIs or KRAs are in terms of fulfilling the business objectives. So I think self-service is a very important outcome from this whole data function, if I may say.
I really love that. You're very right that I think a data office function as well, especially in large enterprises, is very similar to HR in the sense that they are the enabling and the support function. Maybe they build some of the principles and some of the tech functionalities, but they are really enabling the rest of the business domains to leverage data. And I had a recent conversation with a chief data officer who was hiring data engineers and data scientists. And just to your point, I was surprised that he was putting the first couple of points in the job description as being A, being a very good storyteller, and B, being a very good understanding of human emotions, because he's had experience, this chief data officer, in the past of having a very highly technical and very good team, but not being able to converse with the business functions, and thereby the value of data and what they are providing as a service got lost in kind of translation. So I really wanted to share that perspective because I think that's a very important.
I think you're right. Interestingly, I came across an interesting example recently of Wayfair, this company called
Mhm.
Wayfair. Yeah, apparently they spend lots of money behind ads that they would put out. And if you asked a data scientist, as to where should the money and the ad spend really go, they would tell you that there are lots of these guys who are wanting to buy, and let's put the money on advertising to these people so that they will buy. Whereas if you had a behavioral scientist paired with the data scientist, and don't forget the importance of the domain knowledge and the specific problem issue that I talked about earlier. If you had the specific issue that you were trying to solve, which is to get more customers into buying your products and services, you would have the behavioral scientists interpret it a little differently and say, these are the guys who are sitting on the cliff,
Mm.
or who are yet to take up to make up their mind in terms of buying. So we should put our money behind these people rather than those who have already decided to buy. You get it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a now when you use this kind of a use case, which is at a very specific example that I'm giving you, and you identify many such cases across the enterprise, and then you aggregate the whole thing, you can see the enormity of impact that it will make on the entire organization in the use of data to get you business growth, which will be astronomical.
Yeah. I think very critical points, Sid and Rajiv, are bringing in this importance of this behavioral aspect. Even though, Rajiv, it is means many companies do not understand and appreciate it, but some even they do it. Sid, and to your example, putting that requirement in the CV, then it puts back a question, okay, how many people you will get back who are actually experienced both in data science and behavioral science. So it puts a question mark back to the competency development of individuals that we see in organizations. And Rajiv, you also chair one of those committees of looking at the competency. So that also is an important board level topic to see merging of these competencies in individuals that will becoming more and more important rather than segregating individuals or creating compartments that this is a data engineer, data scientist versus a behavioral scientist. What's your view in this moving world in the future? We as human beings, as employees, will be required to be more multi-skilled, multi-dimensional, both business knowledge, data knowledge, and even the behavioral science. Is that going to be a requirement for the future?
It's almost a topic of a separate podcast, perhaps. But this whole the advent of AI and data is going to have such a profound impact on organizations and the way they conduct themselves.
Yeah.
It will change the composition of the workforce.
Yes.
Potentially, it will change the composition of the workforce. Potentially, it will make the economics of the business very different,
Yeah.
because a lot of things that are done, which are done by various people, you don't need those people anymore to do them, because AI and your data will be able to solve a lot of those problems. So there's a large portion of people that will be made available, or will be free to do other things, and organizations will have to have the foresight to be able to look at how to train these people up, redeploy these people. So there's a whole HR issue that is emerging as a consequence of this data and AI related technological advancements that have taken place. So the economics will change, the workforce composition will change, the processes that are there, in the way that if you take 36 steps to do this, it will happen in 3 steps or in 2 steps. So processes will change, the timelines will change. There are a lot of consequential impact that is bound to happen, and it will have a very large impact on people going forward. So the organizations that are preparing themselves for this, are having the foresight for this, will be in a better place over the next couple of years, next 3 years, I would say. Those who are not will be abruptly impacted by it, and they wouldn't know how to deal with it, because they have not prepared themselves for the consequential changes that are likely to happen.
Exactly, rightly said. And Rajiv, we see that's really a part of the focus because data, we call it as the fourth pillar, not only as the only pillar. So, what we want to elevate the importance at board and CEO, that you need to take a holistic view of your people, process, technology, and data. And that's where the flywheel effect is, each is going to impact the other more so going forward.
I would look at it as a four-legged table in which you got three of the legs which are there, and the fourth leg is not there. It will be a wobbly table.
Yeah.
It won't be able to take on anything. You see, you'll have a real challenge on hand unless you get the fourth leg out over there.
We are smiling because Sid and I actually discussed this picture when writing the book and said, okay,
Ah,
how
okay.
we should how we should present the four pillars and this three-leg table versus four-leg
Oh,
table.
so that
Yeah, and without
good.
you knowing that you brought another example, that's why Sid and I are smiling when you're saying that.
But it
Yes.
seems to be quite evident. It's not
Yeah.
that I have come up with anything innovative, but the reality is that that's how it is
Yeah.
emerging in the
Yeah.
world, and so it's something that I would say is quite evident.
And the whole point is that that's the onus or the importance we want to derive on the board that, okay, even if you're looking at a people strategy, look it from the lens of being, you talked about self-service. They need to be also capable to consume data on self-service in addition to AI as a technology. So the each strategy, the people strategy, the process strategy, the tech strategy, and the data strategy, one of the podcasts, Rajiv, you know Ganesh Natarajan, he talked about reimagining the enterprise. That's what he's
Mhm.
talking about. That's where enterprise needs to reimagining themselves.
Rightly put, and I'm glad that he did bring this up because that's the way I would look at it. That in this VUCA world, in this new world disorder, as I kept calling it, and the AI and data will have a transponential impact. You might wonder, I've never heard of the word called transponential, but it's something that I just made it up while talking to you. uh, it's transformational and exponential. So it's really a combination of these two things that are beginning to happen today.
Great perspectives, Rajiv. I mean, time flies when you're learning so much, and we could go, I'm sure, an hour plus more just delving into each of these topics. The psychological topic is dear to my heart as well, especially since the experiences I've faced recently. I think it's built more empathy in me as well from all of this.
I can't resist the temptation of saying that it's very dear to me as well, because to me, customer experience is probably, the heart of every business. I mean, and people very often ignore that. And we find, and even though I come from the world of technology over the last 40 years, I can never, ever ignore the fact that it always keeps coming back to my mind that what is the purpose of this technology? The purpose of this technology is to solve problems. And if you can't solve problems, if you can't solve human requirements that are there, then this is worthless. And I think the importance of customer experience, of course, is paramount in the context of businesses, and it should always remain so. So even with all that you write about data and AI, if it doesn't solve real business problems, then it's not of much value to mankind.
Ultimately, it is to provide value to the stakeholders. And Rajiv, in the book, we talk about, in India, we have this Dil Mange More. So we talk about
Yeah.
this thing about give me more,
Yeah.
right? So every stakeholder, be it customers or be it employees, be your business partners, they are asking more and more from your company, right?
Mhm.
And with every enterprise limited resources, that's the problem statement for the board and the CXO. Okay, how do we fulfill this asking of more by the stakeholders with the limited resources we have at hand? And then they should treat both data and AI as means to achieving those goals in addition to their people and process.
True. Very well said.
Great conversation. Thanks again, Rajiv. So, we wanted to conclude with our question, which we love to ask all of our guests at the end. So,
Mhm.
we've talked a lot about data. So, if we could personify data, Rajiv, it could be any kind of a living or a fictional personality. It could be a friend. It could be a relative. Could be anything that you could think of. What would you personify data as, and why?
Why would you want to personify data?
Again, to bring some human aspect, Rajiv. So we as humans, you see, machines and bits and bytes are alien to us. So if we can personify, we feel closer.
I feel somewhere it is like a Sherlock Holmes. If he's constantly looking for those clues, those little clues that you can find and that you will find in data. You may see the big picture, but you'll not be able to make a lot out of it. Sometimes just that one tiny element of a clue which you will find embedded somewhere can be useful. I think a Sherlock Holmes has the ability to kind of find that clue from that date, from the uh, little clues that he picks up, and data is one such thing that I would personify as Sherlock Holmes.
Very well said. And I think to extend your analogy, Sherlock Holmes is picking multiple data points, connecting them all together, and making a decision based on that, right? So that's what I guess enterprises also need to do, or need to be empowered to do, is not just look at one specific event and make a decision, but connect that to everything else they could connect about the enterprise and beyond.
And Sid and Rajiv, an additional thinking on that is not about just the historical thing, what things are happening in the live thing. So Sherlock Holmes is interviewing different characters and the different actors in that situation, what is happening in live as well. So it's a historical data and also the live data, like
Live
we
data.
talk of. Yeah, that's very critical. And the Sherlock Holmes is also going to structured data and unstructured data, Rajiv, as
Unstructured data.
well.
I think that's a good one. That's a good one.
So, so well said. I think totally aligns, right, Rajiv? Good. So thanks a lot, Rajiv, for joining. I think for us it was an exciting discussion. Hope you had a fun time as well.
I did, of course, and thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure talking to both of you, and on a subject that's very dear to me. At this, as you know.
Yeah.
And it was good to hear about your experience, Sid, particularly in such a scary situation during this war time when you get stuck in a place. I'm glad that everything was okay. The country has done a particularly good job with the passengers and looked after them very well. And you've also been through, a good time coming out of it. So all the best to you, and thank you very much for inviting me on this podcast. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks a lot. Thank you, Rajiv,
Thank
for
you.
joining us today.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
So another interesting discussion, Sid, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's summarize the key takeaways for the benefit of our listeners and viewers. So if I get going, Sid, the first key takeaway that I have from my side is, as we discussed with Rajiv, we are all living in a heightened VUCA world. VUCA means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And living in this world, some progressive boards are already realizing the importance of data and implementing that, actually not just the talk but walking the talk, and having committees within the board, like we heard about what Rajiv mentioned in his organization. The TBC bank already has committee which covers data at the board level. And in addition, if we look externally outside, EBC bank also has a committee which looks at data, director of statistics, I believe. And then JP Morgan has its chief data and analytics officer reporting to the executive management, a CXO level role for data. So that's becoming more critical in this heightened VUCA world. In addition, as some enterprises are doing it, one thought that Rajiv brought out very importantly, that regulators do have a role to play. So they could also come out and mandate the presence of a data committee at a board level as the opportunities and risk for data increases, and the positive and negative impact it could create in this heightened VUCA world. So that would be my first key takeaway, Sid.
Great points, Sujay. And I think Rajiv brought this aspect of the VUCA in a very timely situation. I think that is a very key takeaway for me as well, because we are seeing every day the impact of the current, geopolitical situation that is having from a supply chain, from a tariff, from an overall enterprise perspective. It's, I think, becoming a very important topic for boards, just like we've been discussing AI being a very important topic for boards. From an overall perspective, what Rajiv brought up with the whole VUCA thing is kind of, I think, going to be or already is a board level topic. So in that situation, as we discussed in the podcast as well, and there was a good conversation we three were having, where we looked at the different opportunities this may create, because having the right data at the right time, especially even though you may not see the demand for it right away, but you could use it in such VUCA critical situations, is going to be very critical, both from an opportunity as well as from a risk perspective. Right? So that's, I think, a very important aspect which I feel boards needs to take into consideration. So that summarizes very well what we also mean with data as a fourth pillar, because now it's no longer data as a fourth pillar only from an enterprise value perspective, but it could also be data as a fourth pillar for survival in such VUCA situations.
Yeah, that was a critical highlight or takeaway for us from this discussion with Rajiv. So moving on and carrying on from there, so the business value is finally delivered through the stakeholders a company has, right? Like the customers, the employees, the business partners. And if you have to deal with or continuing delivering with the high VUCA situation prevailing, the importance of having data at the fingertip for each of the business functions who are supporting these key stakeholders who are always asking for more. An enterprise have limited resources. So this all drives the importance of having self-service availability of data at the business functions. In that regard, Rajiv brought out a nice analogy that the data office should look at the HR department and operate like an HR department. Like, just as the HR department does not manage employees directly, they are facilitating the business functions to have the right competency and availability of resources. Similarly, the data office should ensure availability of data, like we call the data supply in the data operating model of ours in the book, ensure that the data intensity, the quality, the compliance, and the speed is delivered to all the business functions in that self-service manner. So the importance of self-service becomes very critical. And like Sid, we discussed in your episode when you were stuck in Doha, how data becomes critical to fulfill on-demand requests. You cannot be waiting for supply to be built up, which was an example of a heightened VUCA world. So self-service is a critical one, and learning from the HR function is a way to go, I would say, for the data pillar.
Yeah, very important points indeed. And I think, especially for scale, right? I think, as you and Rajiv also mentioned in the podcast, this will become a critical factor because data and the data function needs to be the enabling function, much like how HR is enabling, line managers, as Rajiv put it, to perform their role better. I mean, somewhat linked to that. So it's good we are, having the same kind of overarching themes. So my second takeaway was also around the whole aspect which Rajiv, I think, mentioned very well about the psychology and the behavioral aspect, especially in data teams. So he made a very important point, I feel, around data teams and data scientists being complemented with people from a behavioral and psychology aspect, just so that you are not looking at data as facts but looking at the empathy and the emotions behind it, again linking to the last episode that we discussed the different use cases when I was stuck in Doha, and how empathy played a role, maybe even sometimes where fact and logic was missing largely, right? So I think more and more, so along with that VUCA board combination, from a data team perspective, having this skill set either within the existing data team, or at least, to your point, if that could be enabled by the data team across the different business functions with the right facts, of course, backed behind by the data scientists and the data engineers and the other data stakeholders. I think that combination is going to be very critical to enterprises, and then eventually for boards to make the right decisions, not just from a fact based perspective but also from a psychology based perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a very important part because people are still involved in the business of running a business, right? So ultimately, people are driven by emotions, and the behavior aspect is so critical. Even though data is considered as so scientific, but the behavioral aspect determines which is the right decision to be taken at that point of time. And that's so critical, right? And the context plays a critical role as well to make it happen. So that was the important part. We must not forget that even though we are dealing with data, the human aspect is so very critical, and that's a differentiation factor as well. So good point, Sid. So carrying on, the third one from my side was a nice analogy that Rajiv brought out, is to be aware of the wobbly table. Wobbly table meaning a three-legged strategy of people, process, and technology that historically organizations have built their operating models on, and trying to run an enterprise on these three pillars in this heightened VUCA world significantly makes that table very wobbly, and it does not hold up to the incoming changes or dynamics of the business that we see all around. Hence, with data making the fourth pillar, as Rajiv pointed out, that brings stability of that operating model of an enterprise to drive through business execution and differentiation in this heightened VUCA world. So that would be my third key takeaway, Sid.
Yeah, very important point, Sujay. And we smiled because we had even discussed this during the
Yeah.
course of authoring the book. So very, very interesting discussion again, Sujay. So it was great to see such different perspectives from Rajiv, but at the same time hitting on a lot of points that we've talked about in our previous episodes. So, with that, listeners and viewers, I hope you had a great learning and you found some value out of the discussions we've had today and with Rajiv. Please feel free to give us feedback. We are really looking forward to hearing what you like, what you do not like, or what you want us to improve from further episodes. And as Sujay also mentioned in the past, if you have other great candidates who are part of board CXO suite you would like us to talk to, please let us know in the comments of wherever you're seeing this, whether it's LinkedIn or YouTube or Spotify, etc. So, with that, Sujay, I mean, great episode again. Thanks for the collaboration, and let's look forward to the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Sure. Great discussion with Rajiv, and thanks to him. Thank you. Thanks, Sid. Bye bye. Take
Bye
care,
bye.
everyone. Bye.